guys ready?
Our chalice lighting this morning comes from William Blake. To see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. Good morning. What a joy it is to be here in this place of lifelong learning and growth, where we gather time and time again to extend and to expand. So welcome to River Road. This is such a place. If you're new or joining us for the first few times, you've chosen a really interesting Sunday to be here. While this isn't quite my last Sunday, it is my last sermon with you all. The worship and learning theme this month at River Road is renewal, and how fitting it is as we all close out these chapters in our lives and open new doorways, travel down new paths. Let this place serve as an anchor even in the midst of so much transition. And there's always so much to connect to in the life of this congregation and community. Here at the top of the service, I want to share just a few ways to get involved. And as always, check your e-weekly for a full list of events and announcements. Next Sunday, June 16th, is my last Sunday. And it's also Nancy's last Sunday, and that evening is our going away party. And while I don't know all the details, it sounds like it's shaping up to be quite the event. It's here in this building from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. Again, that's next Sunday. And also, of course, thanks to the many, many donors and bidders in this year's spring services auction. We learned so much about it last week, namely that it was a huge success and that it raised $32,000. Thank you to the hard work and dedication of so many. If you were the highest bidder for one of the many things, stop by the auction table after the service in the fellowship hall. And you can also ask any other auction-related questions. And be on the lookout for all the different things going on Sunday mornings over the summer. We're going to have guest preachers. We're going to have a GA watch party. There's also some construction being done, you might have noticed, some doors that have the big X's on them. That means do not go through. This construction will be lasting your duration, and announcements about the construction will be in communications and in your e-weekly, so be sure to pay attention to that. And now, as we enter into this time of worship, it begins with a welcome. I invite you to rise, turn, and greet your neighbor, and remember to stay up after for our opening hymn. So go ahead and please stay risen in body or spirit as you're willing and able, and join us for our opening hymn, my favorite hymn I requested all the time, Gather the Spirit. The lyrics will be on the screen. If you don't know, yesterday was DC's Capitol Pride Parade. Yes, because this time there was a UU presence in that parade with a big old banner, about 100 of us deep. UUs from around the DMV joined together to proclaim that love is at the center of what we do and that we are indeed a safe place. And because we walked in the parade, we all got to be behind the scenes, which is, in a way, its own type of little parade. Pride is so many things, and yesterday it felt like a celebration. Getting to see all the beautiful people gathering, preparing their floats, getting on their costumes, it was an homage to the beauty and the diversity, the joy of living into one's own central truth. To witness so many groups and organizations, faith communities, and even companies side by side to share in a common identity is something I'll treasure for years to come. But Pride, of course, didn't start just yesterday. It has a rich history. And this morning's Time for All Ages is about that history of Pride and the impact it has on us still, and hopefully for years to come.
Hello, this is Reverend Amanda, and for today's Time for All Ages, we'll be exploring the history of Pride. Pride Day, or what used to be called Gay and Lesbian Pride, has taken many shapes over the years. These days, for some of us, it's hard to remember a time in which people in the LGBTQIA+ community were unable to freely love who they love and live the lives most authentic to them. But sadly, for many more, these days don't feel so long ago. There are many ways to refer to the LGBTQIA+ community, and we're always learning so much more. But for this video today, I'll be referring to this community as the queer community, or as queer people. Although queer people have always existed all around the world, our society, and other societies too, only recognize heterosexual relationships as legal and appropriate, and heterosexual people as worthy of resources and support. Queer people were often met with violence and anger, hostility and rage. Many queer people chose to hide their sexuality so that they wouldn't be targets of this kind of injustice. And most people who were out, meaning that their communities knew about their sexuality, faced discrimination of all types, meaning that they would have a hard time finding employment, a place to live, or any kind of safety. But regardless of the dangerous risks of being out during this time, there were people who fought this system of injustice and demanded to be treated with respect and equality. The 1960s was a decade of massive social change. People were rising up against systems of injustice and oppression and demanding to be treated equally. This was a period of great disruption all around us, disruption of our systems and our laws, and without this period, we probably wouldn't be where we are today. At that time, there were many laws set in place that made the lives and actions of queer people illegal. Queer people were often not allowed to gather in large groups at restaurants or at bars, and often they were harassed and brutalized by law enforcement if they did so. It was quite common during this period for their gathering places to be raided by law enforcement, which often led to violence and brutality and arrest, which of course only made their lives more difficult. During one of these raids on June 28, 1969, at the Stonewall Inn in Greenwich Village, which is in New York City, the patrons of this inn in which people were gathered, and also other residents in Greenwich Village, decided that they had had enough. As officers attempted to round people up and check their IDs, people began resisting. There are lots of first-hand accounts of what happened that night and what happened over the next several weeks. Perhaps one of the most notable is the story of Marsha P. Johnson, a Black trans woman who was a staple in this community. She's often credited as having thrown the first brick, but what we know for sure was that she was a leading force in the Stonewall uprisings. The Stonewall Inn mostly attracted queer people of color, especially trans people and drag queens. Trans people are often the targets of the harshest and most violent treatment within the queer community, especially trans people of color. So having a place to gather in community has always been crucial for survival. And in the midst of such great social change happening all over the country, on this night in 1969, that spirit of uprising flooded the streets of Greenwich Village. The uprising ended up lasting for several weeks, according to some accounts. But that isn't where our story ends. In fact, that's just the beginning. This period of uprising, this period of demanding rights, being tired of being targets, being tired of being brutalized and rounded up and restricted from living their lives, this is a period that was crucial for the queer community, which so many of us are a part. The Stonewall Uprising strengthened and created many gay and trans advocacy groups of that time that went on to become larger organizations and also led to Pride. Pride every year is held near the end of June to commemorate this very uprising. And Pride has transformed over the years. Each year it grows in popularity, and now it's even somewhat mainstream. It hasn't always been, though. In the 1980s, during the beginning of the AIDS crisis, Pride was often almost like a collective funeral. Some years, Pride has been a celebration of new legal rights, such as the Supreme Court's decision for marriage equality in 2015. Some years, Pride is just a time for people to get together, but each year, Pride exists still. We've come a long way since Stonewall, but there's still so much more work to do. Although love is the law of the land in terms of marriage equality, there's still so many groups in the queer community that are fighting for their rights. There are also so many within our community that hold other unprotected identities. There are homeless queer youth who have been turned away from their homes. There are Black and brown trans and non-binary people who experience suicide at higher rates. There are disabled queer people who are fighting for their benefits. Their partnerships aren't recognized. Yes, we have won some battles, but we still have a long, long way to go. But each year, Pride anchors us. It anchors us to the promise and the truth that we are still here, that we deserve humanity and protection and rights and, yes, equality, and that we will keep fighting until we are all free to love who we love and live our most authentic and fabulous lives.
May we live into this sense of pride in our lives, not just on one day or for 1 month, but year-round, so that we might be that safe place for people and that they know that love is here among all of us. And now I'd like to invite the children and youth to go to their places of learning and worship and growth.
We come into this space carrying joys and sorrows, that which brings us to laughter and brings us to tears. It is appropriate that we begin this time with that reflection on pride, knowing that in fact pride itself asks us to hold multiple truths at once: the unbounded joy of a liberated and liberating identity, and the fierce resistance to all that continues to oppress. We hold in this place multiple tensions. We hold what brings us together as a guiding light in our lives, and we hold the reality of all that tears us apart in this country and in this world. I want to begin our time of joys and sorrows with just an unmitigated joy that we had a beautiful wedding here yesterday for Sarah Jackson Hahn and Mark Feldstein. What a beautiful, uproarious opportunity. And the glass he stomped on finally broke on the third attempt. I also lift up the entirety of our county as tornadoes made a path through Virginia, Maryland, and various parts of our own communities, knowing that it is storm season, and that storm season is and will be exacerbated continually by the climate change that holds us and that we work and serve to help address in this world. And ultimately, there is no way to enter a sacred space except with the acknowledgement that we live in a sacred and broken and beautiful world. In this week alone, we lift up the fact that 4 long-held hostages were freed from their captivity in Gaza, and that those people, reunited with their families, are being greeted with the hugs that they have so long yearned for. We are also aware that hundreds of civilians died in the midst of that latest incursion, and we know that in this room, while we hold many different perspectives on the violence in Gaza and Israel and around the world, we are committed to having hearts big enough to hold it all. Hearts big enough to know that indeed, across every border, across every boundary, there are no other people's children. Hearts big enough to know that somewhere, somehow, this latest cataclysmic violence that is yet another expression of the cataclysmic violence that has gripped this world in waves for so long must end.
I now invite you into a time of presence and stillness, a time of being rooted and yet rootless and boundless, settling into your seats, lowering your gaze, or even perhaps closing your eyes, and joining me for a moment of meditation and of prayer. Spirit of life, that is spirit of our lives, the lives of our spirits that commingle, that merge and separate and depart and arrive, that spirit we call forth this morning. The spirit that winds and weaves the tensions and the troubles of our hearts with the joy and the gratitude for all that is our lives. The things that have transpired for each of us in our hearts, in our lives, our communities, our families. Often these things are beyond our wildest dreams. And sometimes all we need is to settle into the quiet and into the truth to really access the power of who we have become. Sometimes what we have to offer is not enough to mend the broken world. Sometimes the answers that we have are inadequate. Sometimes the question's too big, so when we have nothing else to offer, we offer our hearts. We offer our imperfections. We offer our unique beauty with hopes that those around us will catch it, even when we can't. Spirit of life, that is the power of community. That is the reason why. Because we don't have enough to change everything. But when our hearts are involved, I believe we have the power to change the world, if not only our own lives. Spirit of life, we come in that complexity, offering only what we have. And while it is never enough, it can be enough in this moment to gather together and do what we always do, to face it all, to expand, to grow, and to lead from love. May it be so in our hearts and in this world. Gratitude upon gratitude. Ashe, and blessed be.
In this place and among one another, we don't give until it hurts. We don't give because anyone, least of all an authority figure, coerces us into it. We give because it is an honor to serve that which connects us, to offer what we can to the person to our left, to our right, before and behind, so that when the great challenges come, we need not face them alone. And when a really great party beckons, we have friends to celebrate alongside. You can make your gifts here to River Road in so many ways. You can go to the website. You can click Give Now. You can text to give. The number is 73256. You text RRUUC and the amount, and they should set you up. There will be baskets going around, and there is a box in the back. Giving is indeed a spiritual practice, and what an honor it is to share that practice with one another.
2024 has been a weird year so far, at least for me. I've been brewing in uncertainty and potential and possibility, stewing in the land of the contingency plan. If not this, then that. If that doesn't work out, then we'll do this. And if none of it works out, I'm taking me and my cat, and we're going to be beach bums in Costa Rica. True story, that was my backup plan. Why not? I've been out here cognitively willing and dealing, trying to figure out what the landscape of my life would look like with only a thought and a prayer on my side. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about search. That is ministerial search. If you don't know what search is all about, essentially, it's where you put an immense amount of labor into the world with no knowledge of what will come to fruition. It's where you have to be confident yet humble. Be smart but not be a smart ass. You have to be faithful and ministerial and minister-like, but be relatable and likable and challenging and tough, but not too tough, and definitely not controversial. It's where you have to promote yourself, but with humility. And it's really a lot of free labor. You hope to whatever deity you hold in your heart turns into something tangible, turns into a J-O-B job. And it's a lot. And it's a lot on the line for everyone involved because they're doing the same thing too, right? And while I could keep this at this cynical level, I'll also say that the process of search, the long packet of essays that we write, the personal website that we're supposed to make, the interviews, the one-on-one calls, all of it, it invites you into a deeper sense of your personal call and forces you to take a nice long look at how ministry has manifested in your life from the beginning of it into the present moment. And if you let it, it can be incredibly character-building in process, albeit just a little exhausting. So it's been weird, but weird in a dynamic sort of way, weird in a life-changing sort of way, weird in a blessed and a holy way. So during the second and third week of January, I underwent 6 unique and yet very similar interviews with 6 different search committees, 7 people on each committee. So over those 2 weeks, I talked to no less than 42 new UUs on 6 committees, and they're all asking me questions. It's what I call the hot seat. And I was in the hot seat a whole lot this year. And then you add on the legwork of talking to the former ministers and the interims of the congregations. You talk to the transitions office, and this number just grows and grows. And that's only during those 2 weeks. That number will get higher, so just follow me here. And in that very first interview, at the end of it, one member said to me, "I can't find anything in your packet that speaks to the lives you've changed at River Road." He said, "Can you tell me how many lives you've changed at River Road?" And I was immediately defensive internally. I have a good poker face, but on the inside, how many lives have I changed? Thoughts such as, is it my job to change lives? Or, how many lives have you changed? Things like, I can't change anybody's life, or they're in a lot of trouble if they're expecting that from me. All these defenses welling up internally, and I think I answered it with something like, well, you'll have to talk to the good folks at River Road to know that, or something along those lines. I don't really remember what I said, but it was the question that got me, that stuck with me. It brought up a lot for me. The expectations placed on ministers, the evolution and the transformation of what faith communities have been and what they are becoming, my role and my purpose, my own insecurities, the pandemic even. It brought up a lot of very practical things. So naturally, I began to think of the multiverse. What else comes up when you're thinking of such things? We're pretty into the multiverse right now, and it comes and it goes from our cultural zeitgeist. And it's always in the background as a plot device in some story somewhere. Time jumping, time travel, alternate histories. These things are always around, but in the last several years, there's been a cultural explosion of stuff about the multiverse. All these different lives that we could lead. All these different worlds and universes that could be happening. But the kicker is that they're all happening at once. They're all happening right now. That they could all be a piece of the same central truth and the same timeline or many timelines all at once. And here's my first take on it. It's because we're all consumed with decision fatigue. Wouldn't it be great if we could just make every decision? Travel down every path, maybe the heartbreak of what might have been, the struggle of this life and this reality somehow balanced by the other versions of ourselves living out some dream we didn't have time for this go-round. It's not quite an afterlife. It's not quite reincarnation. It's another reality, and perhaps it's comforting, if not a tad troubling, and wildly fascinating as a thought experiment. And here's my other theory. We've reached our limit, our cultural capacity. We're ready for the next thing, the next way to live life, the next innovation in human living and understanding. We've butted up against the existing structures, those structures that have determined and dictated our existence for so long, and we're ready for something else. And this timeline that we're in right now, it's strangling us. We're losing our collective breath from the crushing weight of extractive late-stage capitalism. We are gasping for air from the squeeze and demands of systems and values that no longer value who we are and what offer the fullness of who we are beyond our labor. And our labor, which is devalued time and time again. We are tired of the endless wars and the destruction of life. And most of us just want to be left alone for 1 minute to catch our breath, love our families, and take care of ourselves. So we are imagining worlds beyond our own, where we get to be people that we want to be and potentially live the lives that have been robbed from us. So we dream them up. And we write stories about them because that's what we've been doing since the beginning of this timeline. And wouldn't it be great if there was some version of ourselves out there that hadn't gone through what we've gone through, that had made a better decision or invested more wisely or was born into a different circumstance? What would that be like? And so you all know this. My one rule in preaching every time is that I'll never get up here and preach to y'all about something I'm not directly experiencing in my life. And it's because I believe in the power of the direct experience. Direct experience as a portal to what is sacred about this life. And sermon writing is a spiritual practice that invites me to grapple with and eventually embrace that transcending mystery and wonder that we so often talk about. And the very basic concept of the multiverse is a case study in the mystery and the wonder. It's a deep dive into all the direct experiences of all of our possible lives, the ways that we find meaning, our circumstances, and more importantly, the what-ifs. Adrienne Marie Brown, who, by the way, I find a way to bring up each and every time I preach, she describes this in her writing, Ode to the Radical Imagination. In talking about the imagination, she says, if perhaps it is a function of our collective minds, a dream of our endless nights, then there will be abundance on earth as long as we can imagine it. Abundance on earth if we can imagine it, or abundance of earths, she says, abundance of earths. Those abundance of earths that are teeming with possibility and teeming with potential for all these different lives we can lead. And she rounds it out by charging us to grow our imagination beyond the edges of what we can currently grasp. Because we can, as she says, imagine so much, but we can only imagine so much. The multiverse in all of its different versions is ourselves collectively kicking it all at once somewhere out there. Now, this as a plot device and a concept, the multiverse can almost be thought of like an umbrella term because there's so many different ways to approach it. There's alternate history in which certain historical events never happened or did happen or happened in a different way. There's the butterfly effect in which one minor change can change everything we know. There's going back in time, there's going forward in time. There's observance, there's interference, there's quantum leaping, and there's one that's really trendy right now amongst the young folks, timeline jumping. Timeline jumping is where you can access all these different parts of yourself in the multiverse, those other timelines that run parallel to ours, and you can embody that version of yourself, shift your consciousness, and bring it back here with you in this timeline and absorb all the reality. Now, my cynical brain, of course, raises an eyebrow at this for some obvious reasons, such as, what if the other version of yourself sucks? What about the other people in the alternate timeline? Do their consciousness change too? What becomes of them? It's rather paradoxical, and there's always holes in this. But I'm inviting myself this morning, and you all along with me, to suspend disbelief for just a bit and really examine some practical applications of timeline jumping. So let's go back in time a little bit to the 6 different committees. I eventually had to narrow down those 6 different committees to 3 different committees. So now we're dealing with 21 different people that I'm in conversation with about this one opportunity. Now the next stage in the process is going there to those 3 places for a weekend, doing a big old in-person interview in the hot seat again, and preaching live for them. But you're preaching at an undisclosed location that only the search team knows about. So in order to preach those 3 undisclosed locations, or what we call neutral pulpit, I have to craft a unique sermon and service with 3 additional worship teams from 3 unrelated congregations. And then you lead those Sunday morning services with however many hundreds of people who are in the room with you. So now, those original 42 encounters have expanded and blossomed into hundreds of people encountering me in these very specific ways. And that's not to mention all the other people that you're talking to in this process. And they're all looking at you. And I'm an introvert, by the way. So I've been struggling. Now, in all of these interactions with all these people, not only were they encountering me, but I was also encountering myself, accessing parts of myself that did not yet exist, calling forth other versions of me, and embodying an identity that I did not yet have. Perhaps, according to the young folks, I jumped timelines, because in the process, I became someone very different. And it wasn't the process that changed anything. It was the encounter. At the core, all of these theories and ideas about time and the expansion of time and the infinite nature of time, they're all about encountering oneself in the midst of it all. Time jumping, quantum leaping, quantum theory, all the mechanics, all of it has roots in ancient wisdom. Renowned physicist Edwin Schrödinger talks about how heavily his work and ideas are influenced by Vedanta, which is a Hindu philosophy. And it's all about the ever-flowing presence and coming and commingling of time, the abundance of time, or an earth beyond the abundance of earths. The Indian Hindu monk Swami Vivekananda teaches that time is entirely a dependent existence. It changes with every change of our mind. He says that time is in the soul. There's no mystery that our present actions affect the future, but it also seems that our present actions impact the past. After I returned from my sabbatical last summer, going into the fall of this congregational year, I knew that if I were to thrive in this vocation, I had to drop the pretense of what I thought a minister was supposed to be and embrace who this minister is right now. There's a term that we've used all throughout ministerial formation with all ministers, and it's called ministerial authority. Ministerial authority, and we're asked over and over again to reflect on ministerial authority, and time again, this question really annoyed me. Trying to fit myself into a box, and this word authority, it doesn't fit me. All these years trying to understand what a minister was supposed to be and my perception of a minister, but those labels never fit who I was. So when I came back this fall, I began to really let myself come through. I began to share sermons about punk rock and grunge music, the New York City underground of the 1980s. I explored the impact of pop cultural movements and entertainment and spirituality and religion, the mystery and the wonder and the heat that arises from the belly of a protest, and all the places we've managed to find, create, and destroy God over and over again. I pulled from my mystic and pagan roots and my Christian upbringing and my UU present, and I realize now that in the midst of all of that, I finally tapped into the truth of the question of ministerial authority. It's not about power, but empowerment. It's not about authority, but authenticity, about embodying the expression of faith that arises within each of us and draws out and expands out beyond what is seen on the surface, and then to share that experience with those around me. And that version of me from 9 months ago was reaching towards the future. And in this moment, as surely as I speak to each of you right now, I am also reaching back to her, calling her forth here with me, because she had, in fact, reached her upper limit. And it was time for her to dream of other worlds and an abundance of earths. So if we can suspend disbelief, we can indeed, each of us, be time travelers. In 1961, the founders of this house of worship were reaching to us here now in 2024, building for their future and building for our present. And as we do the work of this beloved community right now, the meetings and the budgets, the faithful acts of service, the community building, we are indeed reaching back to them, and together we are all calling forth those who have yet to come, those who we are building for right now in this moment, because time is in the soul. And I tell this complex and ever-winding story this morning to remind each of you of yours, of your own complexities, your own stories, your own life-changing events, your own tales of what might not have been if just one thing were different, your own journeys, your own timelines, your own experience of the upper limits and the what-ifs, the versions of you that are reaching out beyond time and space, the pieces of you that have encountered and that have been encountered. And perhaps it's not about jumping time, but embracing this timeline that we're each on right now and reclaiming this timeline. Expanding our spirits to hold all the possibilities and letting go of the notion of potential and proclaiming the mystery that binds us all together. Perhaps we reclaim our time. And so it makes sense that during that very first interview, I was asked whose life I had changed. Because it took me this whole journey to understand that the life that has been changed during my time at River Road is this life right here. I'm forever changed by each of you and all of you collectively. You've all shaped me as a minister and as a person. You've all shaped and guided my faith, and we went through a pandemic together, and we've come out on the other side. You have given me hope over these years, a true hope. And you've helped guide me to a place of authenticity and a deep, sacred knowing that in this life, this is what a minister looks like right here and right now. And I'm honored to be a part of this congregation's timeline and a drop in the river that flows through this place and within each of our hearts and lives. I honor the work that you do in this world and in this community, in this building, and it's beyond its four walls. You are inscribed on my soul, and no matter how many timelines I jump, I will carry you all with me in my heart, because time is in the soul. So in this time and all the others, may it be so. Ashe, blessed be, and thank you. So, of course, we can't leave without some deep gratitudes. Of course, for the tech team this morning and all of our tech volunteers, really. Everyone who's here or not. For whatever reason, over the years, I've always had mic issues. I don't know if you guys have noticed. And they have always been so gracious and getting me new mics, repurposing mics, screwing in new mics for me. And for that, I thank you. And the folks watching, thank you as well. Of course, for the choir. My first home in any church was in choir. And it is so important what y'all do for a community. Music is the heartbeat of the soul. And without it, we realize how much we miss. During the pandemic, this choir, Cliff, the tech volunteers, they made sure we didn't lose that. And they went through great lengths to give us a quality music program. And it makes all the difference. There's really been anything that I've asked of the choir that Cliff hasn't gotten you all to do. There's barely anything I've asked of Cliff that he hasn't figured out. And of course, Schwai, our glowing diamond Schwai, please never leave us. Or if you do, we'll sing you a beautiful song. Of course, to my co-minister, or not co-minister, my senior minister, Reverend Nancy, who so much of what I have learned has been from her. We have a gem here. And when I was thinking about the day I would leave, I didn't think she'd also be leaving. And I always thought how I would tell you all that we have the best of the best here. And that remains to be true. If you don't know her reputation, if you don't know how her colleagues hold her in such high esteem, and if you don't know how much she's given to this church, I invite you to reflect on that. I have learned so much from you. The mornings of doing devotions and tag teaming for Sunday service, sitting together in her office on a Sunday morning and praying together, knowing that we were holding the space for so many people and knowing that it's not about us. And the ways that we have found our own worship service in our hearts in the rehearsals and the tech run-throughs and the Sunday and the Tuesday worship planning meetings. Working on the staff has been phenomenal. And of course, the gratitude for River Road as an entity, as a notion, as a concept. What faith community is in this society. One of the last voluntary associations that is still surviving. And the gratitude is for those who make it survive. It doesn't happen alone. It's each of you committing to being here and helping shape and form the lives that come through here. So that is the gratitude I have this morning for each of you. And I actually wrote a benediction this time. I never do, I always forget. And this morning, our benediction. While this service does end, our work never does. To live into our truth, to bring one another to the center of love. It is sacred work, and it extends beyond a particular time and beyond a particular person. So as we leave this place, may we hold to that truth until we meet again.